What I lived through that night still haunts me. Even now, I don't know if it was real or if my mind was trying to protect me. But one thing is certain, that house is still watching me. I always like to believe that I was a rational person, someone who trusts their own senses, who doesn't fall for superstitions or poorly told horror stories. But some things cannot be explained with logic, and some experiences defy any attempt at understanding. It all started when I moved to that quiet neighborhood, a place where nothing extraordinary seemed to happen. The streets were calm, the houses had an old but well-preserved architecture. And then there was that house. I don't know exactly what caught my attention first. Maybe it was the fact that it always seemed present, like it was watching. It wasn't abandoned, but it didn't seem inhabited either. The windows were always dark. The curtains never moved. And even during the day, there was something about it that felt wrong. I used to pass by it every day on my way to work. Sometimes I swore something about it changed subtly, a shadow in the wrong place, a detail that wasn't there before. But I always convinced myself it was just my imagination, until the night when everything changed. The first time I realized something was truly wrong was when I looked in my car's rear view mirror and saw the house. Not where it should be, but in a completely different block. I thought it was a trick of perception, maybe exhaustion, but the next day it happened again. And again, no matter which way I took, that house was always there lurking. At first, I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, similar looking streets confusing me. But then things got worse. At night, my house started making strange noises. Footsteps in the hallway, when I knew I was alone. The sound of doors slowly opening, even though I had locked them. And then the voice. The first time, it was just a whisper, something indistinct, coming from the other side of the wall. But as the days passed, it became clearer. You brought me with you. I tried to convince myself I was hearing things. But the truth was, each day, I felt that the house wasn't just following me. It was getting closer. And when I realized that the number on my own house had changed to match the number of that house, I knew there was no escape. That night, I decided I needed to leave. I didn't know where to go, only that I couldn't stay. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and rushed out, my heart pounding in my chest. But as soon as I opened the front door, a chill ran down my spine. The street was wrong. The houses around me looked slightly different. The colors, the shapes, even the streetlights were misplaced, like someone had made an imperfect copy of my neighborhood. And there it was, the house, at the end of the street, waiting. My fingers trembled as I pressed the button to unlock my car. The sharp sound echoed in the night silence, and for a moment, I convinced myself it was all just exhaustion, stress. I got in the car, started the engine, and hit the accelerator. But something was wrong. No matter how far I drove, the streets always led me back to the same place. I turned corners, took different paths, sped as fast as I could, and I always ended up in front of that house. Reality seemed to be folding around me. I could see the same streetlights, the same signs, the same cracks in the sidewalk repeating like a broken record. Then I realized I wasn't just being followed by the house. I was inside it. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest. My body started to tingle, a deep fear settling in my gut. The car's engine died on its own. The radio switched on, static hissing in a low, eerie tone. And then I heard that voice again. You can't run. My blood ran cold. I looked in the rear-view mirror and felt my stomach drop. The house was right behind me, not as a physical structure, but as a towering shadow distorted against the night. The windows were black holes, nothing but a suffocating void inside them. My own reflection in the mirror seemed wrong, slightly displaced. Like I was looking at someone who looked like me, but wasn't me. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed by fear. The world around me was silent, like it had stopped existing. And then I woke up, or at least that's what I thought. I was in my bed, the sun shining through the window. My breath was shaky, my heart pounding. Everything seemed normal, but then I looked at the number on my house, and it wasn't mine. It was that number. The house wasn't following me anymore. It had taken me. My lungs refused to take in air. Cold sweat dripped down my forehead as my eyes scanned the hallway. My house looked the same, but it wasn't. The walls had a slightly different shade, as if they had faded over time. The smell in the air was subtly strange, like old wood mixed with moisture. Everything was in the same place, but something about it wasn't real. I got up from bed slowly, feeling the cold floor beneath my bare feet. My breath was short, each step sinking into the oppressive silence. I opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark, darker than it should be. The shadows stretched in a way that felt wrong, moving with a slight delay, like they were living entities trying to deceive me. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. This can't be happening. This isn't real. But when I opened them again, I saw something that made my breath stop. There was a door where there shouldn't be one. A narrow door, old, made of dark wood, standing at the end of the hallway. I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to see what was behind it, but I knew I had no choice. I approached it, each step echoing like I was walking through an empty tunnel. The air was dense, heavy, filled with static electricity. My hand trembled as I touched the cold doorknob. The door opened on its own. The room beyond it was my bedroom, but not my bedroom as it was now. My bedroom from years ago. The same childhood blanket, the old posters, the scattered toys on the floor. My heart pounded. It was a perfect replica of my past. Every detail exactly as I remembered. And then I saw something that made my blood freeze. There was someone lying in the bed. It was me. I was 8 years old, sleeping peacefully, breathing deeply. I took a step back, my mind refusing to accept what was happening. And then the me in bed opened his eyes. They weren't normal eyes. They were completely black, empty, like endless pits. His head turned slowly towards me, and a smile formed on his face. "You took too long to come back." The voice wasn't that of a child. It was something raspy, distorted, like multiple voices whispering at once. I wanted to run, scream, flee from there, but before I could do anything, the walls started closing in around me. The house was devouring me, and this time I had no way to escape. The air became thick, almost impossible to breathe. The walls contracted slowly, like diseased lungs inhaling my presence. My feet were glued to the floor, as if the house itself was holding me down, stopping me from running. The me from 8 years ago remained in bed, his eyes black as voids, his smile stretched too wide. "You took too long to come back," he repeated. But this time the voice came from every corner of the room, as if the walls themselves were whispering. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but my throat was dry, my tongue frozen. My heart pounded against my ribs, the terror rising like a knot in my stomach. And then the boy sat up. He moved slowly, almost floating, his head tilted strangely, as if he were trying to understand what I was. Every instinct inside me screamed to run, but my body wouldn't move. He stopped just inches from me, and then he whispered something in my ear. "You've been here before." The room disappeared. I was swallowed by darkness. When I regained consciousness, I was back in my living room. Or at least, it seemed to be my living room. The lights were dim, flickering slightly, as if there was something wrong with the electricity. Everything was misplaced by just a few millimeters. The door frame slightly narrower, the furniture either too low or too wide. The television was on, showing only static. Its muffled hiss filling the room. That's when I noticed something strange. The photographs on the shelf. They still showed my family, moments from my past. But now, there was something different. In every one of them, in the background, almost imperceptible, the house was there. Sometimes just a blurred silhouette behind a tree. Other times, an open window with something watching from the darkness. It had always been there. Always. My fingers trembled as I picked up one of the photos and looked closer. My 6th birthday. My father, my mother, me blowing out the candles. And there, in the mirror behind us, a figure, a distorted shadow, standing, watching. And then, the television hissed louder. The image changed. It was my living room, but from inside the house, as if someone was inside watching me. And then, the living room door slammed shut on its own. I wasn't alone anymore. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. The living room door had slammed so hard that the windows trembled, but what truly froze me wasn't the noise. It was the certainty that I hadn't closed it. I wasn't alone anymore. My breathing turned erratic. The television static pulsed like a dying heartbeat, fluctuating between white noise and blurry images. The screen trembled, and for a moment, the image became clear. It was the very room I was standing in. But something was different. On the screen, the living room looked old, as if it had been abandoned for years. The wallpaper was peeling, the floor covered in dust, and shadows pooled in the corners as if something was crawling out of them. And then, the camera moved on its own. It slowly turned to the left toward the door, the same door that had just slammed shut. But on the screen, it wasn't closed. It was slightly ajar, and something was there, a tall, indistinct shadow, completely still. It had no face, just an overwhelming presence. The darkness around it seemed alive, pulsing as if it were breathing. My heart pounded in my chest, and my body refused to move. Then the thing on the screen turned its head and looked directly at me. A freezing chill ran down my spine. I turned immediately toward the door, my skin tingling with a visceral terror. The door was still closed. But for how long? Somewhere deep in my mind, a horrible truth began to take shape. I wasn't just inside my house. I was inside it. The house wasn't a place. It was a being, and it was toying with me. My legs finally responded, and I ran. I stumbled up the stairs, my vision blurring from sheer panic. The second-floor hallway seemed longer than usual, stretching as if the house was expanding to trap me inside. I reached my bedroom and slammed the door shut, pressing my body against it. My sweaty hands slid over the wood as I tried to steady my breathing. And then, 3 knocks. Soft, slow, deliberate. I knew I shouldn't answer. But then the voice came. My voice. You let me in. Now you can't leave. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. I wanted to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I knew the truth. The house wasn't going to let me go. My back was pressed against the door, my breathing short and shaky. The silence after those knocks was even worse than the sound itself. It was dense, suffocating, filled with something I couldn't see but could feel in my bones. And then, the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, my entire body locked up. I could hear the wood creaking under pressure. Something was there on the other side. Something that knew my name. Something that spoke with my voice. Open. The word came softly, almost a whisper, but it didn't sound right. It was off. like something was trying to mimic my tone, but didn't fully understand how humans were supposed to speak. The doorknob kept turning, and then it stopped. For a moment, silence returned. A fleeting relief washed over me, but I knew it wouldn't last. A strange smell began to fill the room. It was something I had never smelled before. Rotten, but not like flesh. Damp, like what had absorbed years of decay and suffering. My hands trembled as I backed away. I needed to get out. I needed to find a way out. That's when I noticed it. The room wasn't the same. The walls seemed slightly shifted, as if the geometry was wrong. The ceiling looked lower. And worst of all, the bathroom door was gone. No, no, no. The house was changing. It was reshaping itself around me. I turned to the window, my last escape. I ran toward it and tried to open it, but the locks wouldn't budge. The wood felt solid, as if the window had never been meant to open in the first place. And then I heard something that made my blood freeze. The door to my bedroom didn't open, but the shadow behind it still entered. It slithered under the door like a thick, viscous liquid, crawling into the room. My body reacted before my mind could understand. I screamed, and then the shadow spoke. "You are already part of me." It was the last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me whole. The world disintegrated. The darkness engulfed me like a bottomless pit. There was no ground, no walls, no ceiling. Just absolute emptiness, pulsating like a living thing. I tried to scream, but there was no air in my lungs. My limbs wouldn't respond. My eyes were open, but all I could see was a suffocating void. And then the voices began. At first, soft whispers in a language I didn't understand. But slowly they changed. They became familiar. My mother's voice, my father's, my childhood friends, and among them my own voice. "You've been here before." I tried to move, but my body no longer existed. My mind was trapped in the void, floating like a forgotten thought. And then the faces appeared. First one, then another, then dozens, all staring at me, pale, distorted, trapped in the darkness as if they were part of it. Sunken eyes, twisted mouths, expressions of pure suffering. And then one of them moved closer. Its skin looked like old, wrinkled paper. Its empty eyes bored into mine. Its lips moved without sound at first, until a whisper finally escaped. "Run." Run? How? I didn't even have a body. But before I could understand, something pulled me. I was hurled backward by an invisible force, and suddenly, the world exploded into light. I woke up on the floor of my living room, gasping for air. The stench of damp wood and rot still clung to the air, but now, there was something else. The house felt empty, not in the usual way, but as if something that had occupied every inch of it had left. I stood up, stumbling, my muscles sore as if I had been curled up in a small space for hours. The photographs were still on the shelf, but now the house was no longer in them. My mind reeled, my whole body trembled. Then I saw something worse. The front door was open, and outside, standing under the dim glow of the streetlight, the house was there, not physically, but as a shadow, lurking, waiting. It didn't need to chase me anymore. It was waiting for me to return. And deep in my mind, a horrible certainty took root. I knew that one day I would go back, because now I was part of it. I wanted to believe I had escaped, that somehow it was all over. But it didn't take long to realize that the house had never truly left me. In the first few days after that night, I tried to go on with my life as usual. I went to work, followed my routine, avoided thinking about what happened. But something was wrong, something I couldn't ignore. It was like an itch in the back of my mind, a persistent sensation that something was watching me. I avoided looking into the corners of rooms for too long. Whenever I passed by a mirror, I felt the need to quickly avert my gaze, afraid I'd see something I wasn't supposed to. And then the nightmares began. In the first one, I was back in the house. But it was different. The hallways were endless. The walls pulsated as if they were made of flesh. The floor creaked under my feet as if I were stepping on hollow bones. I walked for hours, or at least it felt like hours, because there were no windows, no clocks. Time didn't exist there. And then I heard the crying, soft at first, coming from somewhere distant. With each step, it grew louder, a child's cry. My heart pounded. Something inside me told me to run, but my legs kept moving toward the sound. I turned a corner and saw him, the 8-year-old boy, my distorted reflection, sitting on the floor, hands covering his face. I knew I shouldn't get closer, but I did. The child slowly lifted his head. His eyes were still black, but now there was something worse in them. I saw my own face reflected in that void. And then he whispered, "You never left." I woke up gasping, my body drenched in cold sweat. The room was dark, but something felt different. It took me a few seconds to realize. The door to my closet was open, and I was absolutely sure that I had closed it before sleeping. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. A chill ran down my spine as I tried to find a logical explanation. That's when I saw it, in the reflection of the turned-off TV. There was a shadow in the corner of the room, tall, motionless, watching. My blood froze. I turned around instantly, but nothing was there. Or maybe it was just waiting for the right moment to let me see it again. Sleep had become my enemy. Every time I closed my eyes, I returned to it, the house. In my dreams, it felt alive. Every door I opened led me to a room that didn't make sense, a windowless space, a hallway that stretched on forever. The ceiling was too high. The walls moved. The furniture shifted places when I wasn't looking. And always, there was a presence. I never saw it directly, but I felt it in reflections, in shadows cast by dim yellow light, in the noises that seemed to come from inside the walls, as if something was crawling through them. And the worst part? Time inside the house was different. Each dream lasted an eternity. I walked for hours, opened doors, tried to leave, but there was never an exit. And then I woke up. The problem was, I never woke up in the same place. At first, the changes were small. The alarm clock I always left on my nightstand would be on the floor. The curtain would be open when I was sure I had closed it. Objects slightly displaced, as if someone had moved them while I slept. But then, the changes became worse. One night, I woke up on the couch when I was sure I had gone to bed. Another time, I found muddy footprints in my hallway. Footprints that weren't mine. And then, one night, I woke up to a strange sound. Scratching. A dry, rhythmic sound, like nails scraping against wood. My muscles locked. The sound was coming from the closet. I held my breath. The sound continued, constant, patient. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Every instinct inside me screamed for me not to move, to pretend I wasn't hearing it. But then, something happened. The turned-off TV reflected the room, and in the reflection, the closet door started to open, inches at a time. The wood groaned. My eyes were glued to the reflection. The darkness inside the closet was too deep, like a tunnel with no end. And then, a hand emerged from the darkness. Pale, bony, fingers too long, nails digging into the wood as it pulled the door open even further. I wanted to scream. I wanted to get up and run. But then, the thing inside the closet whispered something, a phrase that made my heart stop. I found you, and then I woke up, This time, not on the couch, not in bed, but standing in front of the closet, with the door open, and the darkness inside still moving. I didn't move. My body was frozen, my heart hammering in my chest like a war drum. The closet door was open, and I was standing there, staring into it. But what I saw didn't make sense. Inside, there weren't any clothes. No shelves, no drawers. There was a hallway, a long, dark corridor stretching into impossible emptiness, far larger than the closet should have been. The smell of mold and damp would invaded my nostrils. The air inside that space was colder, like the darkness itself was draining the heat from the room. I wanted to step back. I wanted to close that door and never look inside again. But my feet wouldn't move. And then I heard the sound. Footsteps. Far down the corridor, something was moving. The sound was slow, dragged, like something was struggling to walk. My breath became uneven. No, this couldn't be real. But the footsteps continued. And then I saw it. First, a stretched shadow cast against the walls of the hallway. Then, a humanoid shape emerging from the darkness. But it wasn't human. It was me, or something that looked like me. The face was identical to mine, but the eyes, those empty, black eyes like endless voids. The mouth twisted into a smile that was too wide to be natural. It stopped a few feet in front of me, inside the corridor, and then it spoke, with my voice. "You took too long to come back." A violent shiver ran down my spine. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to run. But before I could react, it lifted its hand and held something. A key. Old. Rusty. It raised the key, showing it to me, and then it took a step forward. My instincts took over. I stumbled back and slammed the closet door shut with all my strength. The room plunged into absolute silence. For several long seconds, I stood there, holding the door closed, waiting for something to try to open from the other side. But nothing happened, only an oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. Minutes passed before I dared step away. I needed to leave. I needed to understand what was happening. But then my blood turned to ice. On my nightstand, where there had been nothing before, now lay the key. The same key that thing had been holding, and attached to it, a piece of yellowed paper, with a single word scrawled across it. "Come back." My whole body trembled. The key, it was there. I hadn't taken it. I hadn't approached that thing inside the closet. But somehow, the key had appeared beside me, as if I had never had a choice. The yellowed piece of paper was still attached to it. "Come back." The word whispered in my mind, echoing like a voice that didn't belong in this world. Every fiber of my being screamed at me not to touch that key, to run, to throw it away and never look at it again. But I knew the house wouldn't allow that. I picked up the key with trembling hands. The cold, rusted metal pulsed against my skin, as if it were alive. And then, the world around me shifted, not in a drastic way, not visibly, but something had changed. The air was heavier, the silence thicker. It was as if the house had held its breath. I knew what I had to do. I turned toward the closet. The door was still shut. I didn't want to open it, but some invisible force pulled me forward. I walked toward it, each step harder than the last. My mind screamed at me to stop, to throw the key away and leave, but my hand was already on the doorknob. I turned it. The latch clicked softly. The door creaked open on its own. The corridor was still there, but now it was different. The walls were covered in something dark, as if the wood was rotting from the inside out. The smell of mold was suffocating, mixed with a strange metallic scent. And then I saw it, a door at the end of the corridor. A single wooden door, scarred with deep scratches. I knew the key was meant for it. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. Each footstep echoed wrongly, as if the floor beneath me were hollow. My senses sharpened. Every shadow seemed to move at the edge of my vision. I reached the door. There was something carved into it, a phrase, "You have always been here." My stomach churned. My hands were slick with sweat as I fit the key into the lock. It turned with a dry, mechanical click. The door creaked open, and then I saw what was on the other side. My bedroom, but not as it was now. My childhood bedroom. Every detail, exactly as I remembered it. But something was wrong. The bed was messy, as if someone had just gotten out of it. The closet door was slightly open, and on the floor, there were footprints. Footprints that started inside the closet and led to the door. The footprints of someone who had just stepped out. Someone who was still here. Behind me, I turned slowly, and I saw my own reflection staring back at me. Not in a mirror, but standing right in front of me. My 8-year-old self. His eyes were black, his smile too wide, and then he whispered, "Now you understand." The door slammed shut behind me, and I knew there was no way out. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to run, to scream, to wake up from this nightmare. But this wasn't a nightmare. I knew that now. The child version of me stood there, unmoving, staring at me. His smile was stretched too wide, his black eyes bottomless. "Now you understand," he repeated, his voice a quiet whisper, almost gentle. But there was nothing gentle about him. My feet felt glued to the floor, the room around me tightening. The shadows in the corners flickered, trembling like something was waiting within them. And then he took a step forward. My entire body stiffened. With each step he took, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder. The light in the room dimmed, as if it was being swallowed by something unseen. The house was alive, and I was now a part of it. "I know you're afraid," the boy said, tilting his head slightly. "But fear won't change anything." I tried to step back, but I couldn't. My body was frozen, like invisible threads were holding me in place. "Why am I here?" My voice came out shaky, barely audible. The boy's smile widened slightly. "Because you always were." My chest tightened. "That doesn't make sense," I murmured, clinging to the last shred of logic I had left. I left. I escaped. The light in the room flickered. The air turned heavy, charged with static. The boy walked to a door at the end of the room. "The only way out. You can leave if you want." My breath caught in my throat. Was this a trick? I wanted to leave. I needed to. But every instinct inside me told me that door didn't lead where I thought it did. The boy opened it slowly. Outside there was nothing but darkness. But within it, I could see shadows moving. People, or what was left of them, standing there, waiting. The boy turned to me and smiled. "If you leave, you'll forget everything." My eyes widened. "What?" "If you leave, you will never remember the house. You will go back to your life as if nothing ever happened." My head spun. Was this my chance? Could this really end? But my voice cracked. "What if I stay?" The boy took my hand. His empty, black eyes locked onto mine. And then he whispered, "If you stay, you will remember everything." My body trembled. I knew he was telling the truth. If I left, I would forget. If I stayed, I would remember. But deep inside, I already knew. If I was here now, hadn't I already made this choice before? The silence was suffocating. The open door, revealing nothing but darkness. The shadows moving, waiting. The boy still held my hand, his empty gaze locked onto mine. "If you leave, you'll forget everything." The promise was tempting. The idea of returning to a normal life, without the way of the house haunting me, without the feeling of being followed by something unseen, lured me like nothing else ever had. But a doubt burned inside me. What if I had already made this choice before? What if this deja vu wasn't just my mind playing tricks, but a fragmented memory of an endless cycle? I've been here before, haven't I? My voice was barely a whisper. The boy didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Panic rose in my chest. How many times? Nothing. How many times have I walked through that door? The light in the room flickered. I could feel the presence around me. Not just the boy, the house. It was listening. I turned to the door. If I left, I would forget. But one day I would return. The house would always find me. And I would be right back in this moment. Again, and again, and again. My hands trembled. I took a deep breath. And I took my final step.